We've been running a little bit late today, but we do want to go ahead and get settled in so we can start our next lecture. We don't want to start this one too late, even though it's the last one in this venue, but we still would like to get started as close to on time as we can and leave as much time for consideration of this topic. It is my privilege to introduce our speaker for this hour, Brother Lonnie Fritz from Beaumont, California. Dr. McClister originally wanted to do this introduction, and he scheduled himself to speak at the same time. So he is not able to introduce Brother Lonnie this morning. It's been my pleasure to become acquainted with Lonnie over the last few years, really since I've been here at the college, the last 7 years or so, through personal contact, but also through the influence that he and his wife Cindy have had on so many of our students. There are a lot of supporters of Florida College that do not realize how large of a contingency we have coming from California. For the spring semester, following the traditional strong states of Florida and Texas and Alabama and Indiana, I believe California was our 5th highest state as far as number of students attending Florida College. And Lonnie and Cindy have been a great influence on many of those students. Lonnie and Cindy have been married for 34 years. They have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. Lonnie attended Florida College from 1977 to 1979 and also studied at Eastern New Mexico University. He was originally born in South Bend, Indiana, but he has spent more of his time preaching in California than anywhere else. In 1980, he began his work preaching. He has worked with congregations in New Mexico, California, Illinois, Bulgaria, Arizona, before moving back to Long Beach, California, and he currently preaches for the Calamasa Church in Yucaipa, California, where he serves also as one of the elders there. Lonnie has taken evangelistic trips to Bulgaria, Russia, Ukraine, and Cyprus. He is also an active member of the Florida College Booster Club of Southern California, where he has served as club president and vice president, and both he and Cindy have served as counselors, co-directors, and directors of the Florida College camps over the last 18 years. A lot of years of service in various capacities. We are very pleased to have Lonnie on the program this year, and I bid you listen carefully as he presents to us his lesson, Disguised as an Angel of Light, Walking by a Counterfeit Light.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for the opportunity that I have to be here to speak to you and be a part of these great lectures. A great topic, and certainly appreciate the opportunity for my part in being a part of this. And thank you for being here as well. There's other places that you could be, but thank you for being here. And I'd kind of be remiss without mentioning my wife at least. I'm not a writer like a lot of these guys that write these manuscripts. And when I found out in April that I was asked to be a part of this, I'm like, I love to do that. But then the manuscript was due by the end of June. And I was already going on a 3-week trip across the world and then coming back. And it was a topic I hadn't really addressed before either. So I went off up to Big Bear a couple of times by myself, and she was back at home. So thank you, Cindy. And thank you so much for being here, my family being a part of this school, and I appreciate the opportunity. It's already been mentioned that for God who said light shall shine out of darkness is the one who is shown in our hearts to give light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. That passage has been the theme for this week, but there's going to be a contrast here to the text that I've been given to talk about. The text I've been given to talk about says, written by Paul, "But what I am doing I will continue to do, so that I may cut off the opportunity for those who desire an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in the matter about which they are boasting. Such men are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. No wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light." That is quite the contrast to the light that we have been talking about. Our subject then is disguised as an angel of light, walking by a counterfeit light. Jesus is that true light that has come into the world. You know, in a series like this, you invite men. I heard yesterday brothers say that they invite the speakers kind of geographically. I notice I'm only one of them from California, and they gave me the topic of Satan. I don't know if it's because he's so well known out there or another reason. But the truth is, I'm very happy to dive into this subject and to think about it. I suppose most of us preachers really don't preach on Satan. Like the previous lecture, we mention him, we talk about him from time to time. But to do a lesson on Satan is not something we oftentimes do. You know, you ever hear that expression, speak of the devil? You know where that came from? It came from the belief that if you spoke of the devil, he would show up and listen to what you're going to say about him. Well, I suppose he's here, because we're going to talk about it. Do you believe in Satan? He's called by many names in the Bible, designations. Satan, the adversary, devil, false accuser, slander, Belial, the worthless one, evil one. And here in our text, the angel of light. Well, disguising himself as an angel of light. Meaning an impostor, a masquerader. He appears to be a friend. A tempter, deceivers, the serpent, God of this world. Beelzebub. He's described as a roaring lion, the great dragon, a murderer, the king of the bottomless pit. The reason I asked, do you believe in Satan? Because the Barna group asked exactly that same question. 2,000 people proclaiming to be Christians. Out of that group, if we'd add them all up, there's different responses, but if we add it all up, 59% said that Satan is not a living being, but a symbol of evil. Well, I want to tell you that Satan is very real. He is very real, and we must understand who he is. My text is from 2 Corinthians. And I want you to understand the context in which Satan has been described in 2 Corinthians. I don't really have a definitive number here, but 2 Corinthians, Paul mentions Satan probably more than any other place mentioned, with the exception maybe of Revelation and Job. Some in Corinth wanted to be regarded as spiritual leaders like Paul. They were willing to bring Paul down so that they might be lifted up. They might be exalted. And what does Paul call them? He calls them false apostles wearing disguises. That's the context. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 through 4. I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness. So what we have here is this idea of craftiness and Satan's deception. He fashions himself as an angel of light. It's abundantly clear that those men in the masks, the ones that were trying to bring Paul down, the ones that wanted to be regarded as some spiritual leader, they were acting like the devil himself. Because that's what he says Satan does. So how do we fight against Satan? How do we pick up the armor? Well, God tells us in many different ways, but I want to continue here in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, he tells us in this place that we're not fighting in a physical war. I know that sometimes when brethren are acting the wrong way and their attitudes are not right, sometimes we have emotions that want to react in a physical way. But Paul says this: the weapons of our warfare are not fleshly, but divine, powerful for the destruction of forces. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing that raises up against the knowledge of God. We are taking every thought captive for the obedience of Christ. I'll tell you right here at the outset, if you want to fight against Satan and against sin, against the darkness that we heard in the previous lecture, it starts in the mind. Bringing every thought into captivity. In a similar warning in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11, so that no advantage would be taken of us by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his devices. Now I want to put that also in the context. If you back up in that passage just a little bit, what you'll see in verse 7 is that Paul instructed the church that they ought to rather forgive, so that this one who had repented would not be swallowed up in too much sorrow. I want to tell you, then Paul says, we're not ignorant of his devices. What is he saying? He's saying discouragement is one of his greatest tools. Don't you see that that's true? Right there in that passage. Let's think about it just for a minute. The brother comes back and you still act funny toward him. And what's he doing? He's going, oh man, I'm not like those Christians that go to the lectures. I'm not like that. I struggle with sin. I want to do what's right, and Satan's whispering, you can't do that. For those goody two-shoes, it's just not for you. But on the other hand, what's he doing with those that see the man go down the aisle? Oh man, has he done that again? Won't he ever learn? Do you really think that his repentance is true this time? That's what Satan does. 2 chapters later, Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2 through 4, he calls Satan the god of this world. And here's how he works. He's busy blinding the eyes of the unbelieving, so that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Brethren, that's the way Satan works. He works on our minds. He works on the heart. He twists the truth. He blinds spiritual eyes. He will shame us or he'll exalt us. Whatever works. The devil will use disappointment, discouragement, despair, doubt, disbelief. And he will not stop trying to steal away any way he possibly can, as long as we live on this earth. We have to fight against him. The subtitle of our lesson is Walking by a Counterfeit Light. Is he true light or just an illusion? Our text says he fashions himself as an angel of light. But here also in this context of 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verses 14 and 15, what fellowship has light with darkness? Or what harmony has Christ with Belial, chief of the demons, Satan? Or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? In contrast to the glorious light is the true nature of Satan. What does Paul call him in Ephesians chapter 6? verses 12 and 13, he calls him the power and ruler of darkness. That's who's behind it all. Acts 26 and verse 17 and 18, we've seen this mentioned several times in the lecture already. But the mission for Paul was to turn people from darkness to light, from the domain of Satan to God. But I want to tell you, brethren, that's our mission too. We need to be turning people from darkness to light, because Satan is behind this darkness. Thankfully, Jesus came to rescue us from this darkness, from this domain of Satan and sin. Obviously, in order to do battle against Satan, we need to have a clear, realistic picture of Satan. Now, I know I have seeing the devil in 3D. I'm not asking you to get out your 3D glasses. I mean, that would be kind of cool to have. That might scare us all into being afraid of Satan. But I want to give 3 words, particular words, that I want to help describe Satan, and I hope it will help us to remember. Seeing Satan in 3D. He's deceptive, as we've already begun to talk. He's destructive. That's his purpose. That's his goal. And he's defeated. And we must, when we think about Satan, know that he is defeated. And he will be defeated. So let's look at that first one in a little bit more detail than just the description found in 2 Corinthians. He is deceptive. We've already clearly seen this deceptiveness, this beguilement, this craftiness are words that describe Satan and his followers. Have you ever been deceived into believing something that's not true? You have internet scams these days, and it's so easy to get taken in. Sometimes a magician will do a trick, and what you see really didn't happen. I'm reminded of a story. I can't walk away from this podium because I don't have a microphone. That's the normal way I'd be doing this. But I heard a story about an Amish family that way out in the boonies and never really come into civilization. But this particular time they came in, and it's the husband and the son and the mother, and they go to a mall. And it's the first time they've ever been in a mall, and the son and the father are sitting on the bench in the mall. The way it goes with those guys. And the son sees an elevator. And the doors of the shiny elevator are opening and closing. And he says, "Dad, what is that?" Dad doesn't know. He looks at it. He says, "Well, let's watch it and see what happens." And pretty soon, an older lady, well-worn, walks into the elevator. And it ding, 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 and a few lights flash. And in about a minute, a much younger, much prettier woman walks out. And he says, "Son, go get your mom." Sometimes our eyes plays tricks on us. We laugh at that. It's a good story. The sad thing is, Satan has no elevator. It's a descender. And he deceives intentionally. Deception, deceit, beguilement, craftiness, that's what he's all about. And the thing is that he disguises himself as an angel of light, and he has done this from the very first reference of Satan to the very last reference of Satan. He is a deceiver. He is the one filled with deception. If you look at it clear back to the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 3, and I've just got down verses 4 through 6 in particular here, but But when we look at this text, we know the text. The serpent was more crafty. God calls him Satan, specifically. Satan, the deceiver. Watch a crafty deception. Indeed, Satan says to the woman, has God said that you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? Did you catch that? Now, we know the commandment was eat from any tree in the garden except for the tree in the midst of the garden. You shall not surely die. After she restates what God says with clarity. Satan says, you will not surely die. I want you to know what he did. First of all, he tried to confuse the message. Has God said don't eat from any tree? No, that's not what he said. Then he tries to confuse and muddle the consequences. No. God knows that you'll be like him. He confuses the consequences. He does that with us as well. Eve, God asks, why'd you do this? Her response, the serpent deceived me. And I ate. Why are people deceived? Well, either they don't know, as also was mentioned in some previous lessons. They don't know the message. They don't know what this word says. Or they don't believe or know the consequences. I may ask the question, do you know what you don't know? About now you're scratching your head thinking, I don't know. Or maybe the answer is no, because you don't know what you don't know. There are two ways of not knowing, in particular, God's message. One is we're uninformed. Some people think that's bliss. Some people think, if I don't know, then it doesn't bother me. It doesn't hurt. Well, that's not true either. And the second is being deceived. From the beginning of the world, the devil has used this tool to trick people and lead people away from Satan, or from God to his world. I was reading something that D. Bowman wrote the other day, and you know what he calls that? Devilish discombobulations. Don't you like the way he says things? Okay, that's the beginning. Let's go clear to the end. Last reference of Satan. Satan will be released from his prison, will come out and deceive the nations, which are the four corners of the earth. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone. Also here in Revelation chapter 12 verse 9, and the great dragon was thrown down, and the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. That's what he's all about, is deception. He's deceiving the whole world. And so you see it oftentimes in the book of Revelation. Jesus then deals also with Satan's deception. We'll go from the beginning to the end, from Genesis to Revelation. Let's jump in the middle to the master teacher. Jesus says this: he was a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in truth, because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. That's who he is. That's what he does. Brother David, on the first lesson that got us started Monday night, he said several times, that's what God does. He recreates. This is what Satan does. He destroys. He deceives for the purpose of destruction. You go to some of Jesus' teaching, the parable of the sower. What does he say in the parable of the sower? The evil one, Satan, what does he do? He comes to steal the seed. And then he causes affliction and persecution. And he brings worries of life and deceitfulness of riches. Over and over again, we see the deceitfulness. We must be aware of that deception. I want to look at Jesus' temptation. Jesus is tempted by Satan. And I also believe it really shows his deceptiveness. We can look at several different passages related to that deceptiveness, that temptation of Jesus. But temptation number one, we know the story. Jesus has been out in the wilderness. He's been fasting for 40 days. And we say the temptation is to turn stone to bread because he's hungry. But if you carefully look, Satan says to Jesus, if you are the Son of God. I believe that's where the temptation lies. It's for Jesus to show himself to Satan. If you are the Son of God. And the second temptation, he takes Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple. And he says, the scriptures say that you're not going to get hurt. So jump. They had already been in the wilderness. He could have had him jump off of a mountain. But no. He takes him into Jerusalem. I believe the reason he takes him into Jerusalem is the location, the temple. Jesus is beginning his ministry. And he says, jump. What a better way to jumpstart your ministry than to have the angels carry you safely to the ground. Could you imagine the reaction that would have received? But Jesus answers again, it is written. And then the third temptation. He doesn't say, prove who you are. I think he says, I want you to think about who I am. He takes him to a high mountain and he shows him all the majesty of the kingdoms. And he says, just give me a little bit of props here. Bow down. Recognize that I control these people. Now, why is that temptation to Jesus? Well, what did Jesus come to do? He came to gain those souls, to seek and to save the lost. He wants souls. And what does Satan offer? A shortcut. Isn't that what he does a lot of times with us? A shortcut. Yes, it's a little compromise here, but just bow down and I'll give you all these people you want. Jesus says, no, you shall only worship the Lord your God. Now, oftentimes what we do with these temptations is we compare them to the temptations found in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 16, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. And we say the bread is the lust of the flesh, and jumping is the pride of life, and bowing down is the lust of the eyes. But doesn't turning stone to bread involve a little bit of lust of the eyes and pride of life too? Temptations are more multifaceted than I think sometimes we give them credit. It's not just a temptation. It's a temptation to take this step, which may seem innocent enough, but then it takes us to a place that we don't want to go. Perry Hall wrote, and I appreciate Perry Hall so much, he has a book coming out You'll note some information in the lecture book about that. But Perry Hall wrote, "If you are the Son of God," is not only a challenge to Jesus, but also to his Father. It challenges the identity of Jesus and his relationship to the Father. It challenges the Word of the Father. Temptations are more multifaceted than we often think. The temptation to eat is not just about hunger, it's about self-declaration. Within the temptation of the flesh, there might be several layers of temptation beyond the obvious. It's one of the points that reading an advanced copy of his book has helped me to see in this lecture. Jesus faced temptations, but he faced them with the Word of God. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Isaiah 5 and verse 20. That's what Satan does. He will rename evil as good and good as evil. He'll substitute darkness for light and light for darkness. Sweet for bitter and bitter for sweet. And I've got several examples in the Bible, that come from the Bible that help us to understand that the message that Satan puts out there is so true today. Examples in morality. Just a few examples quickly. Animal rights. I believe you need to treat your dogs and puppies right. Sometimes we protect the animal. We protect the unborn of an animal. But when it comes to abortion, it's the mother's right. Could you get a better, clearer example of light for darkness and darkness for light? Sexual sins. Living together. I know we're on the campus of a college and young people, and that's a temptation to them. But I would tell you, I've heard so many older people, maybe it's because I live in an area where there's a lot of retirees, they live together because they get more Social Security that way. We're not talking about a young people's problem anymore. And they think, no, they're not. Many examples of immorality, homosexuality, alcohol, and several examples that we have in the book. That we all know that's how Satan works. Worship. Have you seen the bumper sticker? We all, let's all get along. It's the coexist bumper sticker. I'm sorry, sometimes I want to run up on them and say, oops, sorry, I couldn't coexist very well with that. But they're the symbols from Islam and peace and Judaism, Wicca, and even Christianity. And let's just all have our own path to God. God said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You know what? Let's follow God. Let's not walk by Satan's deceptive light. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy, empty deceit, empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. The devil will set a snare. And there's one reason he does that. He's doing it for destruction. He wants to destroy. And there's several scriptures, and maybe this is where we turn oftentimes when we're talking about Satan. We go to the one that will destroy, the lion that will destroy, or the picture of the dragon. Jesus says this, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. That is a fitting description of what Jesus is saying about Satan. He came to steal and to destroy. Satan is pictured in Revelation as a devouring dragon. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. If you look in the context of that passage, you'll find that it's about Jesus. And does that, when you think about that, does that not remind you of Herod? Matthew chapter 2, verse 13. Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. Who is behind that? It's Satan. He's a devouring dragon. To destroy was Satan's intent with Jesus. He wanted to destroy him. He must have wondered about what this plan was. Why was God, Emmanuel, coming to this world? The confusion on Satan's part must have been great. Why is God coming here? This is my domain. His intention with you is no different than his intention with Jesus. I love Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. In that passage it says, if you keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, that's how we defeat him. It's the blood of Christ, the sacrifice of Christ, and holding to that testimony. The devil's also pictured oftentimes in the way that we look at Satan as a roaring, devouring lion. I've heard recently some people that had gone to a zoo, and it wasn't a lion, but it was a bear. And she stuck her arm in there to pet the bear. I'm telling you, that's not real smart. And if there was a lion out there roaring, I'm sure that we would be taking cover. We would be staying inside. They say that you can hear a lion roar for over a mile. And maybe our brother from South Africa could tell us even more. But that's a picture of someone you don't want to mess with. But the thing is, he doesn't really want to scare you. That's not his purpose. His purpose is to devour you, to destroy you. Remember the conversation between God and Satan about Job? God says, where have you come from? And Satan says, from roaming about on the earth and walking about on it. What was he doing? Why was he roaming about on the earth? Well, the devil gets permission to put Job through trials. It's interesting to me that God never tells Job why he did it, why he was going through it. He never tells him. We know. Helps us. Satan's goal was to get Job to curse God to his face. If he roamed around in Job's day and he prowls around in Peter's day, what do you think about 2015? He's here. And even those of us who are Christians and have been for many years need to heed that warning. The evil one, the world forces of darkness, spiritual forces of wickedness. That's the description. He's taking aim at you with flaming arrows. Not literal, but those, by means of lust, Satan declares war in your soul. He'll use what looks good to you, what feels good to you, what you've accomplished, what you've acquired. He'll use everything he can in every recorded interaction of the devil, both old and new. His intention is clear. His intention can be seen. Yet, we have to understand that Satan's goal is our end. Temptation is about destruction, about here and now. It's not for eternity. In every recorded interaction, he does that. I want to read another quote from Perry Hall. He says, "We are Satan's meat and method. Temptation is about destruction, both here and now, for eternity. Satan wants to destroy God's creations. Temptation is not about pleasure, even when pleasure is the temptation. Pleasure is the means to an end, and a mean end. Satan is not interested in our delight unless that deluding bliss leads us to our devastation. Satan is about destruction." And one last point, because there's one thing that is for sure. Satan is defeated. He is defeated by Jesus, and he will be defeated by us. The Son of God appeared for this purpose, to destroy the works of the devil. Just as Jesus' purpose for us is to seek and to save the lost, his purpose for Satan is to destroy him, to destroy the destroyer. Jesus defeated Satan in the wilderness when he resisted temptation by knowing God's will. Satan left him to an opportune time. It's Jesus defeated Satan by knowing God's will. We can defeat Satan by knowing God's will. Jesus defeated Satan again when Satan tried to put a stumbling block in front of him. And what does he say to Peter? "Get behind me, Satan." Jesus defeated Satan on the cross. Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out, Jesus said. Through Jesus' death and resurrection, he rendered powerless him who had the power of death. That is the devil. He rendered him powerless. I want to say that Satan, let's think about Satan here for just a minute. He doesn't defeat Jesus when he's born. He doesn't defeat Jesus when he tempts him face to face. And now he sees an opportunity to put him to death. What Satan must have thought would be his greatest victory turned out to be his greatest defeat. Jesus, yes, was put to death, but that was to pay our sins. But on the third day, he rose from the dead. He burst forth. We talk about light from darkness. That's light from darkness. And Satan was defeated. And he then gives us the ability to defeat him as well. I love the words of a mighty fortress. I'm not sure how much we sing it anymore, but I want you to listen to this. And this is about this subject. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper, he, amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe, Satan, doth seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate. On earth is not his equal. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. were not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. Dost ask who that might be? Christ Jesus, it is he. Lord of Sabbath, his name, from age to age the same. And he must win the battle. There's another verse that we don't often have in our books, but this is what Martin Luther, the writer of the song, added as the last verse. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One word from him shall fell him. We can't do it without God. Followers of Jesus overcame the accuser by the blood of the Lamb and by the power of their testimony. Revelation 12 and 10 and 11. The God of peace, I love this verse, can crush Satan under your feet. He can do that today. Sometimes we look at Ephesians chapter 6 and the armor there, and we sometimes focus on the armor. I want you to quickly look at this. It's God's strength. It's God's armor, so that we can be able to extinguish the flaming arrows of the evil one. So that we can stand fast. So that you can be able. Who's it come from? It comes from God. And what are those weapons that we have? Righteousness. Live righteous. You want to defeat Satan? Live righteous. The gospel of peace. Isn't that interesting? The gospel of peace is our battle, our armor, what we can go out to fight with. Our faith, our salvation, the Word of God. And one that Paul has no comparison for, prayer. Want to defeat Satan? That's how you do it. Flee immorality. Resist the devil. But resist him firm in your faith. Then the Lord said to Cain, from the very beginning, even when Cain was tempted, God says, you have the ability, with my help, to overcome. God frees us from the power of sin. And one last picture as we look at this idea of defeating Satan. I love this picture in Revelation. I've been teaching Revelation. And so many people talk about the big battle and being built up. And sure enough, Revelation chapter 19, verse 19, I saw beasts and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. And John saw an angel, as in one, come down out of heaven and laid hold on the dragon and the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him. I want you to think about that. When the right time came, Jesus sent one angel. There is no battle. Satan has no chance. One angel. God wins. God wins. And brethren, so can we in our battle against this very real opponent. With God's help, we also can win. Brethren, let's let the light shine out of darkness. Thank you so much for your attention.